Hello, I am Sarah Weiss of Passion and Pickleball. Welcome to the Spanglish World Networks on Zingo TV, channels 249, 250, and 251. You can download the Zingo TV app on iOS and Android app stores. Don't forget to rate and leave a comment. This app is free and is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire, Fire TV sticks, Roku, and Roku sticks, as well as all smart TVs 2016 and on. Oh boy, do we have a special episode today. I'm very, very excited about our guest, and it has a little bit to do with kind of my history. So I'm not going to take up too much time, but I do want to give you guys a little update on what happened April 2023. I went to the US Open to compete in women's doubles and mixed doubles. And while I was there, I was unassumingly outed by this movement called Icons Women on Twitter that posted 4 or 5 tweets that went semi-viral about me competing in female events. Now, being that I grew up a different gender, this was a big deal for a lot of people. It caused quite the drama for me, and it made that event go from extremely fun, super happy and joyous to scary. I was scared that I was going to get accosted, confronted, and possibly even harmed. So it made it very weird for me, but I did end up going. My mixed doubles partner, who had known me and had competed with me in other tournaments, actually backed out once he found out about this because he never knew and he felt like he might be cheating if he played with me. So, all this to say, I've had actually an incredible year and obviously a year full of some vile comments towards me and opinions and viewpoints about transgender women competing in female divisions. Whether your opinion is that it's wrong or that it's right, all I care about is that I get to play pickleball and that we have fun and that these perspectives are shared in out of respect. I'm always happy to have a conversation and a dialogue with people who share respectfully. I have an open mind myself, and I would expect nothing but the same from others. With that being said, my next guest who I have on here today is a professional. And I always say, I'm not a professional, so I don't share my opinions. I share my experience because that's all that really matters here. Who we have today is a very successful, he's a professor. He does a lot of things, but he's a theologian, a sexologist, and a psychologist who just celebrated his 90th birthday. So old school is not an excuse here. He's got lots to say. He's done a lot in the field. And with that, I will invite Dr. William Stayton onto the show.
I'm glad to be here, Sarah.
Hello.
Finally.
Awesome. We're really excited to have you. I'm hoping that we get some people who also hop on and ask questions. I hope you don't mind that. But thank you so much for showing up. Is there any way you could share a little bit about your background and experiences in psychology, sexology, and theology?
Well, I started out as a pastor. And as a pastor, I found I had people in my congregation that I didn't even know they existed in their gender or orientation or biology. And so I had to become educated immediately in order to be a pastor to people that I didn't even know existed in terms of who they were. So that's how I got started. And then I began having people come to me as a clergy with their issues. And I, again, had to find out, how do I respond to people who are different? And in that, I've created a whole department of PhD people who are in the field of human sexuality. And so I'm then finally wrote a book for lay people when I retired that explains all that I've been teaching only in lay people's language and with experiences in people that I've talked with or worked with or educated. And so it's really important for me to get this message out because I think so often people think in binary terms. People either this or that. And there is no such spectrum in life. And so I've worked a lot with biological differences. For example, worldwide, 1 in every 2,000 live births is an intersexed child,
That's a
which
lot.
means that they're not just all female and all male, but somewhere in between. 1 in 2,000 live births worldwide. That's a big, big spectrum of people, and we all lie somewhere on that spectrum. Also, I've learned that gender differences are there too, where people have attitudes, feelings, and behaviors that may be consistent with what the doctor said when they were born, or may not be in terms of what they feel. And so we also need to understand the spectrum of people's feelings, attitudes, and behaviors towards their gender identity, and their gender expression.
I'm glad you mentioned that because most people kind of think it's male and female, and they don't understand the three aspects that you just mentioned: their sexuality, their expression, and their identity. Would you like to give a brief overview on the difference of those three so people who are kind of new to this get a little bit of an understanding?
Well, in terms of gender, people, I think there's a spectrum with people who see their gender as appropriate for what the doctor called them when they were born. Then there are people who are not sure and they identify with both, either or both. And then there are those who are transgender who have feelings, attitudes, behaviors that are opposite from what the doctor said. And that's a whole spectrum, and we're all on that spectrum. One of the things I do with my students, for example, is I ask that they line up according to the most masculine to the most feminine in the class. And I get people all the way along. For example, I'm much more personally, although I'm male, I'm cisgendered, I act a lot like female and feel comfortable at that end of the spectrum, so that it's where people are, and that this is all different, and it's all good, and it's all normal.
I guess that's why not all men are 6 feet plus with hairy backs and deep voices. Not all women are
Right.
5 foot with high pitched voices, super slim. It's a huge mix. I heard it called a
Absolutely.
bimodal distribution. I heard you say cisgender. Now I know what that is, but for our viewers, can you explain what cisgender means?
Well, cisgender means I identify with he, him, his. I relate with women as a heterosexual male. I operate in my gender as most males, but I'm not there in terms of the whole spectrum. I'm all over the board.
Right. So basically you identify and express as the gender that you were determined as by the doctor who delivered
Right,
you.
right.
Awesome. Awesome. So the big question is, how do these concepts interact with the world of sports?
Well, what's important is that we go with the feelings of each individual person, who they are, what they feel about themselves, their attitudes, behavior, and I think we need to respect that. And we need to then go with the way the person sees and experiences themselves, whether it's the same gender, a different gender, or a mixed gender.
So what most people are going to say is, well, is that fair?
Of course, it's fair. What is fair? You know, I mean, once you begin to look at what is a male and what is a female, and you see the great variety,
Mhm.
spectrum of differences, you begin to see that it's important to take each person and the way they feel and operate and behave and go with that, so that it's consistent with who they are, not what you might come from your previous beliefs to be.
Yeah. Well, like you said, when you put a male over here and a female here, there could be a male that's on this side, but is, petite, more expressive as a female, maybe smaller muscle tone, and could actually compete over here, and vice versa, right?
And you could have a woman who is stronger than the most masculine male you have.
Right. And something that I always hear is, well, these advantages, the biological advantages that a male is born with, and then goes through puberty, whether they change or not, they've got those biological advantages.
You see, that's binary thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we have to. One of the things I have my students do is to try to define what is a male and what is a female, and that is such a wide variety within that there is no either or. It's both and.
Yeah. And what I find funny about it is, when you do the research and you look up how many transgender athletes have been successful in sports or gone professional, and when you do the research, I found 11 or 12 professional transgender athletes, which to me is kind of funny when you consider how much of an uproar there is right now over transgender athletes, especially transgender women competing in female events.
But you see, that's based upon binary thinking. The people are either this or they're that, and that they should be consistent with their binary thinking. And there is no such thing as binary thinking.
This conversation is going to come back to this exact thing, right? The binary thinking many times, I'm sure. Sports, men and women, it's very binary thinking.
Right.
So,
and fortunately, basically in society, I think we're changing. So we're seeing women, for example, on football teams and basketball teams, and we're seeing mixed gender people in all of our sports, and that's healthy, I think.
I believe so too. There's a lot of women who train very, very hard to compete at a very high level. And some of them kind of outgrow their teams of women, say, and want to compete with the men. And they shouldn't be told that's wrong. That is wrong, in my opinion, to be told
Absolutely.
that that's wrong.
I totally agree.
And what if in a world where you just try out for the team, man or woman, you make the team if you're good enough?
Yeah, right.
Seems to make sense to me, but there's people who might question that thinking. I have a question. What kind of challenges do you see or know of transgender athletes experiencing in the sporting world?
Well, first of all, I think a lot goes into the way a person was brought up and taught. And a lot of that is based upon their religious belief systems that were binary. And so I think that religion can be very harmful, as well as for some very helpful, in terms of, are they act-centered? That is, a male always acts this way, a female always acts this way. Or is it on a spectrum of males can act all along here, females can act all along here? And many religious systems are binary.
Man does this, woman does that.
Right. And that is very harmful, I think, and yet is very strong in our society. What we need to do is to begin to educate. I think people are basically ignorant about sexuality. And
Yeah.
I think that they're secretive in that they don't talk about it at a very deep level. And that they're often traumatized because they may feel differently than what they have to behave. And so one of the things that becomes very important is we have to build knowledge, build what do we know actually about development and moral development and religious development. And then we need to learn how to communicate without feeling secretive, without feeling that we're going to be judged by binary thinking. And then finally, we have to share our experiences, and positive experiences are really important to share so that people begin to change their viewpoint as they become more educated, more communicative around these issues, and more sharing of their own personal life and experiences.
It's so true. When I was publicly outed by this movement, for me, I was very secretive. I tried to keep my whole gender experience to myself because I don't identify with it. I'm not trying to make it a big deal or anything. But when it happened, I had to ask myself, what am I going to do with this? I've obviously had this big movement, pushback, and now it's public and people are messaging me going, I had no idea. And my question to myself, and well, that led to the answer. I think I need to embrace this and give an opportunity for education, share my experiences instead of hiding them, and be vulnerable with it so that people can understand that this is real. It's not a mental illness, that you're not the only one, that doesn't feel like you match everything the doctor told you. And
That's
it's not
so
always,
important.
it
Yeah.
is, it is, and since embracing that, I don't know, mission and purpose that I feel like I've been given, a lot of beautiful things have happened. A lot of people have reached out to me saying thank you, not necessarily on any of the LGBTQ side of things, but people who have thanked me for giving them the ability to be themselves, to not worry that, yeah, they're going to be judged by people who don't understand,
Right.
but to hide who you truly are and keep that pain in for them is not
Yeah.
worth it.
You see, one of the problems that I find as a clergy person and as a theologian is that people get caught in having to think one way or the other and have not been able to expand their thinking beyond binary thinking. One of the things that I found is that if you want to have power, religions and governments can control your sexuality, and that's power. And so what happens is that religions and governments try to then formulate and their power by stating this or this. And that is very not only dangerous. In our country, we're facing this right now in terms of what we're up against. And I'm really glad that sexuality is coming into the framework of thinking that we can begin to change people's understanding of the grab for power that religions and governments have taken in order to have power.
Taken over our bodies, taken over
Absolutely.
our right to get married to whoever we want, being able
I'm
to, the pro-choice battle is very serious, and it has a lot to do with religion and
I-
government.
I'm teaching a course at Bucknell University starting in March, and one of my first guests is a woman from the purity movement, where she was taught in her church that to be pure, you need to be totally sexually abstinent. And that was ruination in her life. It ruined her relationships. It ruined her ability to express herself sexually. And so it's breaking out of that purity movement and becoming more understanding and giving less power to that religious type of thinking or that governmental type thinking. Because we've got a Congress who even wants to legislate based upon sexuality because of power.
Yeah. Well, and I always say about, the big culture war of transgender people in sports right now. It's like the government likes to create a problem and then say, we're going to solve it. Is that kind of accurate with what you've seen along the years with trying to control body autonomy and sexuality?
Not only resolve it, they want to solve it in their way of thinking.
Eliminate it.
Right.
Yeah, prevent it. Hey guys, we're here. People are who they are. We're not perfect, but we're unique, we're special, and I kind of like that.
And it's helping people understand that they're special and to understand the differences between what is a sexual right and a sexual false belief system.
That's beautiful. Sexual rights. We have sexual rights. You never think of that, do you?
And we have rights to sexual pleasure. It's interesting. I worked with the Surgeon General on developing guidelines for appropriate sexual attitudes and behaviors. And one of the things that we found was that religion often spoils that for people, and that they don't experience their right to sexual pleasure. They don't experience their right to sexual expression. Instead, it's control, control, control.
So I really do. I want to touch on, transgender athletes, but, as a theologian, and for those of you who don't know what a theologian is, maybe you can explain that before you answer the question.
Well, it's a person who studies theology, right?
It studies theology and religion and stuff. So why, in your opinion, as a theologian, why would religions promote that? When you say it's about control, is this really government controlling religion, controlling people? What is your take on that?
Well, a lot of times they'll say it's based upon the Bible, not realizing that the Bible is not a science book. For example, in Genesis, where it says that God created man and then created woman, that's not a possibility, not biologically. And yet it's taught still as the way God created. Instead, the female was created first, and the male comes out of that. And so we need to teach proper biological development because that's God's creation, instead of a false biblical idea which wanted to put males first and foremost.
So that checks out.
we have to teach that the Bible is not there as a science book. It's there to help people maybe to develop their belief systems, but it's got to be seen that it's not scientifically accurate.
I like that. Thank you. And there are a couple people commenting. One lady says, my sisters in the 70s competed in hockey on the boys team. One of my sisters is a very fast skater. The other was a goalie. It was my dad that taught for them to play in the Gatineau Minor Hockey League. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing, Brenda. Also have...
Yeah, that's great.
Yes. Hello, sorry for bothering you. I want to offer promotion of your channel. Oh, I should have read it first. Spam. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. So being that I've experienced all this kind of kickback, and again, I find it, and I don't want to say silly because I do respect how people feel and why they feel the way they do because of based on, the belief systems they've been brought up in, the media feeding them, whatever they're feeding them.
And it's hard to give up deeply held beliefs.
Yes. Yes, it is definitely hard to do that. It takes a very open mind to rattle your belief system cage and kind of shift your focus and your perspective on something that could be possible. That's all it is.
And a lot of
This
good education
that's what I'm hoping to
and
give.
good
That's why I've got you
and
here.
good communication to be able to
Yes.
talk about these things.
Yes.
This is exciting to talk about,
Yeah.
and it's freeing for people.
It is. It is. A lot of people in my life, when I told the world, hey, I don't actually identify with the gender that you see me as, I identify in a different way. Most of the people in my life turned their back on me and left, which I found interesting because for me, I would be so fascinated. I would want to watch and learn. I would want to understand what's happening because to me, it would be so brand new and so neat to see.
Well, it might also be very scary
Of course.
because it is contrast to maybe the way they feel inwardly and what's coming out at them from outside.
Yeah. Well, luckily things have evolved quite a bit, since the early days. What are some things you've noticed in the evolution of like transgender athletes and sexualities, but with a main focus on transgender athletes?
Well, one is seeing women in men's sports and men in women's sports most. I think that's really healthy uh, illustrations of the way it should be and what is sexually healthy. I think we need to take a look at what is really sexual health. And to me, it's taking people's attitudes, feelings, and behaviors and make it consistent with what they see themselves and how they identify. I think that's really important. And so I really welcome that kind of thing. For example, in my course, I have a professor who's coming and teaching in my class who comes as a drag queen, and he gets everybody's attention, but he's one of the best teachers we've ever produced in our program. And so it's such a great example of how we have to embrace differences and see how they can really be healthful and helpful in helping people understand.
It's evolution. It's evolution. It's growth. It's expansion. I love it. Actually, when I first started to transition, I looked very different, and I worked at Costco. And at Costco, I did membership upgrades and I would sell people MasterCards, or I would not sell them, but I would offer them MasterCards. I broke records at that store for how many I would would upgrade. And it blew some people's mind because there were people there who didn't accept me. They didn't understand. And then one of them was doing YouTube videos and one day spoke about it and said, I've got to say, I'm changing my view on this. This lady who came into the store and she looks weird and she's in this transition. She's the best dang salesperson I have ever seen. And he's like, I don't know why I've been so judgmental. Like, this is a really cool human being. And
And
I'm
it's
really glad
freeing.
it's
You see,
freeing.
she was becoming freer in her viewpoint. Yeah.
That's right.
And that was healthy. And she saw it as healthy and she rejoiced in it. Yeah.
Yeah, really exciting stuff. It made me tear up, so it was really cool. Um, something, what do you say when people say, because I don't know about you, but I hear these arguments that are on repeat. They're like a broken record. And some people say, well, sports were always divided into men and women for a reason. My response is always, it hasn't always been that way. What would your response to that be?
I would be that too. And I would try to get them to explain what they mean by reason. And it's always been this way. Because again, that's a deeply held belief system that may have no foundation whatsoever. So I like to question foundational thinking. And people then come to their own aha. Maybe I got it wrong.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, when you look at the early 20s, early 20th century, it wasn't just men and women. There were combined teams. There was no men and women division. There was just teams.
Right.
They started to divide when, I know of one, I forget what you call it, but where it's like marathon triathlon where you shoot the guns. There was a woman who won in the Olympics against all men and women, and it was, I think, a year or two later where they divided them into men and women's categories. So there's a lot of facts out there in history showing that that's not how it was.
Right. It came with the development of binary thinking and the desire for power, and realizing that if you want power, control people's sexuality, and you've got power.
We keep coming back to that. Yeah. Someone, Beth just asked, how do we address the statement that a trans woman has an unfair advantage in sports because they are inherently stronger?
There's no scientific evidence to prove that. And I would go on that. I would say, where is the science that says that? Because it's really based upon a deeply held belief, not on a true view of sexual health.
Yeah. And again, I can speak for myself. So before I transitioned, I could do 75 or so push ups. Today, 10. Just saying, hormonal differences are huge. So my whole body composition has changed dramatically. My muscle tone, dramatic shift. Everything about my body has changed. It's been about just over 9 years that I started hormone replacement therapy. So for me, when I get on the court, I have height. I'm 5'10" and a half. So I'm tall. And some people might think, oh, well, she must have these huge advantages based on her background. But I'm outpowered on the court very often. Very, very often. There are women that are taller than me all over the place, stronger than me, faster than me, all over the place. So I can only speak from my
And there are men who are not.
And there are men who are not, and men who are. Again, it's not binary. It's
exactly
a huge distribution spectrum, bimodal
exactly.
distribution. Yes. Oh, 100%. So how do we address these concerns? Because that's the common question that's always asked or mentioned about the unfair advantages based on biology. How do we address these? What do we?
Well, again, we need to build proper knowledge based upon facts. We need to help people to begin to communicate about these things without feeling judged or boxed in, but who are able to communicate and not feel judged or boxed in. And then we need to share our own experiences of all these differences, which we all exemplify.
So
I think those are key factors in bringing about change.
So what do you say about the muscle-bound man who puts on a wig and says, I identify as a woman, so I'm going to compete with the women so I can win all the gold medals? What do you say about that?
But he's acting. He's not giving what his gender identity or expression really is. He's acting a part and hoping people will take that as fact.
Right. And you don't see, so I have never seen a transgender woman who looked like that, who basically was just a muscle-bound man with a wig on saying, I'm transgender and I'm coming into the sport, and starts dominating. It hasn't happened. Again, with all these statements about the advantages, you would think there would be this huge, massive list of pro athletes who are dominating the sport because they're transgender women who just have all these advantages, but there's not.
But I would also want to question his fear. He's expressing some fears that if he wasn't like this, then people might really know who he is.
A little overcompensation, maybe, perhaps.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. That's that's the big thing. I hear it's funny because as me being me, most people come to me with the same things over and over, and they'll mention people like Leah Thomas. I don't know if you know who that is, but a swimmer, a transgender female athlete who won an NCAA competition, and the lady who got second place had massive kickback, caused a lot of a stir up and drama over it, and really put Leah in a bad light, and it was nasty. So everybody brings her up to me. This one person and one MMA fighter are the names I hear constantly, nonstop, over and over and over. What do you say about that?
But what is the fear that they're expressing?
Well, that it's unfair and that they're taking away opportunities from other women.
Is that the real fear underneath?
I don't know. You tell me.
I think they're afraid of themselves. I think they're afraid of some of their inner feelings that they don't even want to express, that they're scared about. And so they have to rely upon these false beliefs and make them try to be real in their life when they're not.
So, in other words, and this is something that I say a lot, is it's easier to blame others on why you feel the way you do instead of take responsibility for why you feel the way you do.
That's right. Or even understand. I think people even fear understanding that they might be different.
I agree. I agree. So,
also, I don't think we take into account often enough the 1 in every 2,000 live births that are intersexed so that they can have hormonal differences that are part of the expression. They can have genetic differences that are part of the expression. They can have biological internal differences. So there's so much that goes into what is a male, what is a female, what is masculine, what is feminine, that we can't even put things anymore into a binary place.
Yeah, you can't even say if you're not born with a uterus, you're not a woman, because there are many women who are born without a uterus.
That's right.
Yeah,
it's interesting. Right. I have a friend who's a physician who was a male and always believed that he was female. He even tried to marry a woman to kind of prove this. He became an astronaut. He became a pilot. He did all these masculine things and finally came to terms with himself. And he transitioned. And he saved his sperm before he transitioned. So then he's now a woman, and she partnered with a woman. And so they had this partnership, and she took her sperm and impregnated her partner, and they had twins.
Cool.
And they're both the biological parents of these twins.
Wow.
And she took further hormones and she breastfeeds one of the twins.
Amazing.
And so she was on Oprah. So this is an out story, which even surprised Oprah in her last show. And it's really fascinating that we can't put people in boxes anymore.
Nope.
And there are so many differences that we need to learn to appreciate and see that we haven't even begun to explore all the options that people are experiencing today. So that's...
we can barely begin to comprehend what we really are and what's really out there and what we are capable of.
I'll tell you, amazing. And you only have to be a therapist and get these people coming to you and seeing how different we all are and how it's beautiful, and helping people to learn to accept themselves and to feel normal in spite of their differences, and to be able to then to talk about it. And then they become the educators of others.
Yeah.
It's an exciting time for me to be in this field. Right?
It is. It's quite neat. I have two biological daughters, and they're both completely different people. Completely different
Absolutely.
people.
Absolutely.
And you know what science is doing these days? They're doing uterus transplants to a point where I'm looking into it myself.
There's a wonderful movie out that I'm very familiar with and was part of its production, I guess. I don't know. Called Trans, just Trans. It is beautiful, and it takes in theology, it takes in psychology, it takes in behavior, it takes in attitudes. It's a great film for educating people. And one of the things that the faith community that I'm a part of sponsored through our local theater, where we had a showing of it in our theater. And the filmmaker and I were the respondents afterwards. And it was such an education to our community about all these differences.
Good. I love it. People deserve to know that there's more to life than that binary, these belief systems that have been deeply rooted for centuries. It's nice to learn. It's nice to grow, expand, evolve.
And it's freeing.
It's very freeing. It's very freeing. So, what do you think about, again, me being an athlete who this year I'm doing a big run to be a professional pickleball player? What kind of guidelines, policies for fair competition do you believe should be in place, or should there?
Be who you are.
And do you not worry that a bunch of men are going to put wigs on and dominate the competition? Do you have any worry that that would happen?
Is it really likely? And what are they really saying?
They're scared.
Absolutely. And what are they scared of? I mean, I would want to explore their feelings rather than try to tell them. I would want to keep exploring. Well, what brought that about? And where did that come from? And what's that based upon? And what's the science?
So, do you think they should prevent that from happening with any guidelines or policies or rules that say you can't do that?
No, because that only puts people into hardened spaces where they're caught. I really try to explore, well, what's behind this? Why do you really believe this? What brought this about? Where is this based upon? Did you have a personal experience that created this? I would try to explore beyond what they're saying.
And is this before they compete or after they compete?
I would do it before and after. I would do it whenever I find them coming up with this that goes against my belief system.
So would you say that if someone who's just trying to gain an advantage, go win and maybe prove a point, put a wig on and say, well, I identify as a woman, and they try and compete, and they say, based on, maybe an interview, and basically the interview shows that, yeah, this is an act, this isn't real, what would you say should be done? Do you let them compete, or do you say, no, sorry, you're not identifying as a woman, you shouldn't be in this
Right.
category?
I think I would make that kind of a ruling.
I like that. Yeah. I think that's very fair. I think to be able to get to know what's real, because what you're going to find is that the genuine women who come in and maybe, okay, well, we see that you're, transgender. We'd like to have an interview just to make sure that you do truly identify as a woman. This is not some kind of ploy, not some kind of tactic.
Right.
I think that would be very fair.
Right. I agree.
And I don't think it needs to be that it has anything to do with how long you've been on hormones or what's in your pants. That seems to be the big one. I like that. Just an interview. I would be curious on what would happen if the sporting world said, "Okay, here's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna interview you." I would love to see what would happen. I think we'd have some interesting interviews. We'll say.
Yeah, you would.
Cool. I like that. I like the sound of that. So, this is the big thing. What are the benefits that a biological male might have? And again, I know you're probably repeating the same stuff, but for the people who are watching, because again, this gets very repetitive, and they talk about the advantages. So, what kind of advantages, playing devil's advocate, would a biological male have even after puberty?
Well, the important thing is to answer for that person, what is sexual health? What is a sexually healthy person? And it's a person who understands himself or is going for understanding, who is acting appropriately, who is behaving appropriately, and who is able to open up and share who they are based upon their development. I think it's really important to understand that we all want sexually healthy people. And that one of the things that makes a person unhealthy sexually is when they're denied who they are and the ability to express who they are in reality and not play act.
Have you come across any findings, research that kind of dispel all these misunderstandings and misconceptions about transgender athletes?
No, because that's not been my field of exploration. I've had transgender athletes in therapy. I've had transgender athletes in my courses. And I've had those who are play acting, like a group of male sports people from our football team who came in wigs one day to class.
Mm-hmm. For fun, or was it kind of?
Yeah, I think they were for fun. But on the other hand, I wanted to know what it was that was promoting this acting out.
Yeah. Come sit here and chat. Let's have a chat. So, how can we better educate the public on this kind of stuff?
Well, having courses, having this kind of discussion is really helpful. I've been asked to do a lot of discussions, for example, on my book, which is based upon these ideas called Sinless Sex. A challenge to religions, because I was writing as a theologian as well as a professor. And getting people to talk about this, people, I think, generally, I have found that people are really wanting to be educated. I mean, one of the problems that parents have is that their children are going to know more than they do. So when I give courses to kids, I won't give a course unless their parents are involved.
Smart.
Because parents are afraid that their children might know more than they do. And then what does that do for them? So it's very important to me that education has to take place across the age spectrum, from early childhood to late adulthood. One of the things I find, I teach a course for retired people, actually. It's an Institute for Lifelong Learning. And I find that grandparents are some of my best students because they're having better understanding of their grandchildren than their children are. Because they've got more time to devote to it now as retired people. And so I find that grandparents are becoming educators to their children because they're accepting their grandchildren.
That's so beautiful. That's beautiful. And it kind of brings me up to the next thought is, what do you think the future of this conversation is? What do you anticipate it'll look like as we evolve and grow and maybe start to combine men and women into sporting categories? What do you think the future of this conversation might look like?
Well, that will be more accepting of sexual rights and sexual pleasure than we have been. It's interesting. When I was working on this Surgeon General's call to action for sexual health and sexual behavior, one of the things that he questioned was, what are the barriers to sexual health and healthy sexual relationships? And when people said religion was a major barrier, that was a very painful thing. So that I think that we need to get education into theological education, into seminaries. I think we need to get it into training therapists, because many therapists are not even trained to deal with these things. I think we need to get it into our curriculum in our colleges, universities, and graduate programs. Social work needs to get this into theirs, and that everyone needs to become educated so that we can promote authentic, real, healthy sexual behavior and sexual attitudes.
For sure. And the last thing I'd like to ask is, how can an individual or a sporting organization or the people watching here who say, I agree with all this, like what do they do? What can they do to further this conversation and expand people's minds on inclusivity in sexuality, expression, and identity?
Well, one of the things I do is there's a chapter in my book on the universal sexual rights and universal sexual pleasure, and how it goes against what many people have brought in to believe in their belief systems. And I go through these in my courses with people and say, well, now, how did your religious upbringing deal with this? How did your school system deal with these things? How does your employer and employment agency deal with these things? How does your company deal with these things? So that we begin to see that education is really important across the spectrum of thinking and experiences. And it's interesting because people go through this chapter, I think it's 7 in my book, and they have a lot of ahas. This is considered a universal right. This is considered universal pleasuring. I was never brought up with this. And they begin to then put into perspective a new way of thinking that is based upon science and evidence.
Thank you so much, Bill. How can people get a hold of you or get a hold of your book?
Well, it's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all that. It's called, I have it here, Sinless Sex, A Challenge to Religions.
Beautiful.
And it tells how to get a hold of me. And I have a website, drdrstayton.com.
Awesome. Well, Bill, thank you so much for your time. Or may I say, Dr. Stayton, you've been an incredible guest. Well, Bill, then, thank you. And happy birthday. I'm
you.
so honored that you took the time to come on my show.
Glad to be here.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
This show can also be heard on the Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out spanglishworld.ca for all news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, live it.